Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing 7 rules for texting your ex back. I provide audio and email coaching to help people try and get their ex back or get a new girlfriend or boyfriend. Check out my website for more details. www.dateme.tips. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing 7 rules for texting your ex back. So if you have gone through a breakup and you want to try to get your ex back, the most likely way you will begin to reconnect is via text message or via a messaging application. Text messaging is the least pressure way to try and reconnect with your former partner. And in today's podcast, I'm going to be giving you 7 rules that you need to be following for texting your ex back to give you the best chance of success. So let's get straight into this. And number 1 is if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, then in most instances, you should never contact your ex again unless they contact you first. So if you have been dumped, if you are the dumpee, if a relationship ended and it was not your choice or decision, then in most instances, you should never contact your ex again unless they contact you first. And that's very important in regards to today's podcast where I'm giving you 7 rules for texting your ex back. Is that number 1 is if you are the dumpee, then you certainly shouldn't be sending the first text. That's a very important rule to remember and to understand. Now, there are a few exceptions to the rule, and I go through them in various other podcasts that I've uploaded. So please make sure you subscribe, you ring the bell for notifications, and you check out the previous content that I have uploaded. I have a playlist called the No Contact Rule, and if you go into that, if you listen to the podcast within it, it will go through the exceptions to the rule and what you need to understand to implement my version of the No Contact Rule in the most successful way possible. But as for number 1 in today's podcast, what we need to be understanding, the number 1 rule of when you are trying to text your ex back is if you've been dumped, then you do not send the first text. So now let's get into number 2. And number 2 is if you are the dumper and want to try to get your ex back, then you should text your ex once as a way of starting to reconnect. So this links on to the first point, obviously, which is number 1 was if you are the dumpee, you should never contact your ex again unless they contact you first. But number 2 is if you are the dumper, then you do need to make contact first. So in this respect, you need to be sending a text message to your ex explaining why you ended the relationship and in general the reasons behind it and what your feelings were at the time, and most importantly that you are now feeling apologetic, that you are sorry for what you have done and how you see things going forward. You need to be laying out the situation where you apologize, you acknowledge the situation, and you basically say to your ex in your own words, if you would ever like to speak again, then please contact me. Now, it's very important to understand, but as the dumper, although I am saying that you should send out this text, you do only send 1 text, at which point you never contact your ex again unless they reply. So if you are the dumper, you send out this message, you apologize for causing the pain of a breakup, you explain your feelings and as for why you did it. You then let them know that you have changed your mind and you would really like to reconnect if possible. And then you say to them in your own words, look, if you would ever like to chat again, then please contact me. So now let's move into point number 3 in today's podcast of 7 rules for texting your ex back. And number 3 is remember to answer the previous text and then ask a question yourself to grow the conversation. So if you are the dumpee and you receive a message from your ex, the dumper, you want to be replying to this text and then asking your own question, making sure you add a question mark, make it very clear that you are asking a question and not just making a statement. as a way of trying to grow the communication, grow the conversation. Because if you want to try to get your ex back, then it's very important that you regrow this connection and move things forward. If you are the dumper and you have sent out this first message and then you're waiting, who knows? It could be days, weeks, months, years. Sometimes you might never hear from your ex again. And that is why you've got to understand that there is no 100% guaranteed way to get your ex back. No matter what position you're in, nothing is guaranteed. But if you are the dumper and you send this message out to your ex, if and when they reply, you do the same thing that I've just suggested, in which you respond to whatever they've said, and then you tag on a question yourself to try to grow this communication further. So you would have sent the first message, you then received a reply, whenever that may be. You read the reply, you reply to what they have said and what they may have asked, and then you ask a further question. So now let's get to point number 4 of today's podcast. And point number 4 is keep your texts roughly the same length as your ex's, unless they are very short or very long. In these instances, you want to send a few lines of text. So in general, what I'm trying to get across here is you just want to be sending a few lines of text. Now, that should mean that you can replicate roughly the same amount of text that your ex has done. If they've sent out a few lines, then that is exactly what you want to be doing. Just matching that, replicating the interest level within the confines of your message. However, if your ex has sent you a text which is very, very short, 2 or 3 words, then you certainly want to be making sure you send a little bit more than that. Make sure you send a few lines. If your ex sends you a huge text message, many paragraphs, you don't need to be matching that word for word. You don't need to be counting the word count. Just send a few lines back. That would be sufficient. It shows you of interest, but it also shows that you're not going overboard. And more importantly, it is showing that you want to grow the conversation rather than sending just 2 or 3 words. So a few lines is the best way to do it, trying to match in general the length of what your ex is sending, but not doing a word count and just making sure you're not doing too little or too much. So now let's move on to point number 5 of today's podcast. And that is to remember to come across as happy, carefree, and fun. So if you're texting your ex and you're having this conversation, it's quite possible that you might be feeling confused, you might be feeling some bitterness, depending on your position within this connection right now. But it's very important that if you want to try to get your ex back, you certainly need to be coming across as happy, carefree, and fun. You can't be coming across as negative. You can't be coming across as somebody who is very unwilling to grow this conversation. If you sound bitter, if you sound angry, if you sound frustrated, then that is not going to grow the conversation. That is not going to build the level of romantic emotional attraction between you and your ex. You need to be making sure that you're coming across as somebody that other people would like to spend time with. And that is somebody who is happy, carefree, and fun. So even if you're going through the pain, even if you're angry, even if you're frustrated, even if you're feeling bitter, if you actually want to grow this somewhere, this is not the time to be quizzing your ex. This is not the time to be trying to get into an argument over it. This is not a time to be really dwelling on things we don't need to be dwelled on right now. Come across as happy, carefree, and fun. So point number 6 of today's podcast is after 5 or 6 messages, suggest meeting sometime within the next week. If this isn't possible, or you aren't quite feeling the vibe, then suggest moving up the communication levels instead. So you can't have a relationship over the phone. The only way to have a proper relationship is via meeting, and that is how you will find out whether there is any chance of you reconnecting on a proper long-term foundation between you and your ex. You want to be growing a brand new relationship on something which is a bit more sturdy than previous, and you can only do that by meeting face to face. So ideally, after 5 or 6 messages, you want to be saying to your ex, look, would you like to meet up sometime? Now, you don't want to put them on the spot and say, let's meet right now. So just do it into the future, would you like to meet up this weekend? Something along those lines. Now, if you're not quite feeling the vibe, or maybe you can't meet, maybe there's distance between you, or maybe you're just not able to meet, then you want to go through the communication levels instead. So instead of actually asking to meet, you would ask to have a telephone call in a few days. And then when you have that call, You might want to ask to have a video call if meeting is still not feeling quite right or not if it's not possible. Moving on to a video call is the next best thing. If and when you get to the video call stage, that is when you really want to be trying to find out a way of if and when you can meet. But going through the stages is sometimes the necessary way you have to do things to really build up that vibe if you're not quite feeling it, or maybe it's actually physically impossible to meet. That is the way you need to go. But ultimately, you need to be trying to meet as soon as possible and seeing if you can grow this connection once more. So now let's move into point number 7 and the final point of today's podcast for 7 rules for texting your ex back. And number 7 is if your ex doesn't reply to a message you send, then go back into no contact. So when I say no contact, I do mean my version of a no contact rule. For those of you who still aren't really familiar with my version of a no contact rule, as I was saying previously, I have done lots of podcasts explaining my version of a no contact rule and what it's all about. In essence, the no contact rule is something a lot of people suggest you do to try and get your ex back. But the problem is there's many variants and many versions. I believe that my version will give you the best possible chance of trying to get your ex back. So subscribe to my podcasts so you can familiarize yourself with my version of a no contact rule. And this is very important because if you send a message and you don't get one back from your ex, you need to be implementing my version of a no contact rule. So it doesn't matter whether this is the first message which has been sent or whether you've been exchanging 3 or 4 messages and it's all of a sudden just gone quiet. You need to be going into no contact. Maybe you've even got to the stage of where you've met, you've kind of gone back to messaging and it's gone quiet once more. Once again, at that stage, you need to implement my version of a no contact rule. It's very, very important to understand that if the text messaging seems to stop, then you need to make sure you step back into no contact because texting is like a game of tennis. You can't play tennis if somebody doesn't knock the ball back. So imagine playing tennis, you hit the ball over the net, you need the ball to be hit back to you. You can't just hit it back if it's not hit to you first. And that's the same with texting. So think of it that way. You send a text, if you don't get a text back, you can't text again. It's not possible. Don't double text. It will not likely be positive for you. It will likely create a situation where you lose even more value in your ex's eyes. It's very important to hold your value at this stage. So don't come across as low value, don't come across as needy. Make sure you hold your value and only text after you receive a text when you're having this type of conversation. So I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. I hope these 7 rules for texting your ex back have proven to be helpful for you. Let me know in the comments your thoughts and please feel free to ask any questions. Always remember that with or without your ex, you will have a positive future and you will find happiness again because you will either get your ex back or you will find somebody even better. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.
Yeah, if you miss your ex, we can help with that. Help you get him back, or we can help find you someone else. Yeah, Vincent Bo, the relationship coach, giving you some insight, bringing you a new approach. DateMe.tips, go and check the site, giving you advice, helping with your love life. Get your ex back, or move to the next. Ain't no sweat, you know Vincent Bo got you. Finding love ain't no problem. Yeah, DateMe.tips, check it out now.